Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Professor Ali. Can you hear us?
Dr. Yusuf, good morning.
Okay. Good afternoon from Thailand and good morning in Turkey, right? What time is
yes.
it?
It's like 9:10 right now.
Okay.
Sorry for being late. I had a problem with the Wi-Fi because of this heavy rain last night.
Okay.
So the IT staff found me a kind of a cable, so I'm connected through the cable.
It's okay. No worry.
So just a second. I'm just trying to.
Yeah, it's good to have you here again and again.
So can you see me?
No, not yet. I just only hear your voice, but not able to see you.
Don't be patient. You're gonna see my beautiful face sometime soon, I guess. No.
Okay. Now, yeah. Now we can see you now.
Actually, I was just trying to set the, the background. Dr. Yusuf, just give me a few seconds. Let me switch off the phone. Otherwise, it won't stop calling, okay?
Okay, sure.อาจารย์ท่านอื่นๆเป็นยังไงบ้างครับช่วงนี้สอนออนไลน์กันไหมครับที่มหาลัย
Now, yes, I'm ready. Let me just share my screen and open the file. And I hope everyone is doing great, enjoying their time. As I see Dr. Yusuf is wearing a t-shirt, here we are shivering out of cold. It's still cold here and rainy.
Your topic today is going to be a very hot issue in Thailand.
So we're going to see the reactions.
There are many debates. There are many debates about this particular issue at the moment. So which is very interesting. Yeah.
Okay, am I allowed to share my screen? I guess, right?
Okay, you can try to share your screen.
So please confirm whether you can see the screen.
Yes, we can see your screen now.
So you can still see the screen, right? There's nothing wrong?
Yes, we can see your screen very clearly. Yes, very clear.
Okay. So when you say I can start, I'm ready to start.
Okay. Let me start first. Okay, as usual.
And so please don't forget to record the session.
Okay, I think it's okay. Now it's 1:11, I guess. So maybe it's a good time to start now, I guess. Let me. Okay, wait a moment, please. Okay, good afternoon. Greeting from Pattani, Thailand, everyone. Welcome our participants from Thailand and abroad to the third event of the month with PSU Open Mobility 2021. In this session, our invited speaker will go through quite a complex and controversial issue with significant impacts on English language teaching or ELT, not only in Thailand, but also in many other countries around the world. And today's topic is the myth of nativeness in English language teaching. As usual, before we jump into the intense controversy, a big thanks goes to Dr. Rumroj Chopwan for agreeing to be our moderator for this afternoon session. Dr. Chopwan obtained a PhD in applied linguistics from the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, University Brunei Darussalam. And currently, he is working as an English lecturer at Pattani University. His research areas are second language acquisition, collocations, language learning strategies, and teaching English in EFL context. Would you please give a big round of applause to welcome Dr. Chopwan?
Okay, thank you very much. Assistant Professor Dr. Yusuf Bonsuk, the project manager for very kind introduction. As a moderator, I would like to greet you all with Sawadee krab, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good morning for Turkey, a very good afternoon everyone in Thailand and Indonesia. Let me welcome once again to all participants of PSU Open Mobility 2021 virtual exchange program under the topic The Myth of Nativeness in ELT, English Language Teaching. And the invited speaker of today's section is Associate Professor Dr. Ali Karakaş Berdur Mehmet, Agif Assoc University from Turkey. His profile is very fascinating. Let me read for you, ladies and gentlemen. So Professor Dr. Ali Karakaş is currently working as an associate professor in the Department of English Language Teaching at Berdur Mehmet Agif Assoc University, Berdur, Turkey. He graduated from the English Language Teaching Department at Uludağ University, Bursa, Turkey. He earned his PhD in Applied Linguistics from Southampton University, UK. He's also a postdoctoral member of the Center for Global Englishes, Southampton University, United Kingdom. His main research interests include global Englishes, English as a lingua franca, language policy and planning, English medium instruction, and teacher education. He's currently co-edited a book entitled English as Medium of Instruction in Turkish Higher Education, Policy, Practice, and Progress, to be published by Springer. Oh, super amazing. So big congratulations in advance for the published book to come. Sorry. And
thank you so much. Yeah,
before we're gonna begin our section, let me tell you about the outline of this section. First, presentation by Associate Professor Dr. Ali, approximately 1 hour and a half. After that, we open the floor for the Q&A section, comments and sharing, by all participants. If you have any questions, please write down in the chat box of our Zoom, or you can ask in person during the live Q&A section. And last but not least, I would like to ask for your cooperation to fill out the form. Actually, there are two forms, the evaluation form and the certificate one, but we combine the forms, your two forms to be one, okay? So you just complete all parts of the link provided. I will send you the link of the form later after the talk section. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready to go on board now? So yeah, it's time to have fun and enjoy the talk of the section. So I'd like to invite Associate Professor Dr. Ali Karakaş Berdur Mehmet Agif Assoc University from Turkey. So please welcome, say.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chorwan, for these nice introductory remarks. I guess maybe one of the audience are already familiar with me because this is, I guess, the third talk, right, Dr. Yusuf? Yes, correct me if I'm wrong. This is the third one.
I think so. Third one, yes.
To be honest, I'm a little bit hesitant right now to talk about nativeness because Dr. Yusuf is an expert. His thesis was on nativeness, the construction of nativeness.
You are more expert. You are more expert.
And okay, probably he's going to see lots of quotations he already used in his dissertation, especially in the literature part. So, Dr. Yusuf, if I make actually any kind of wrong conclusions, feel free to correct me. And it's a kind of a chicken and an egg issue, right? In most contexts, nativeness and non-nativeness, certain privileges attached and certain connotations, negative or actually positive connotations. I'll just try to summarize them under 6 actually subtitles. So first thing first, I'm going to start with some kind of key terms. We're going to look at, elaborate on these key terms, what these actual terms mean, literally, in scholarly publications, in terms of like dictionary meanings. And the main one, the native speaker, right? How do we conceive a native speaker in terms of especially physical characteristics? So what comes to our mind when we just say a native English speaker? We're going to see some examples, especially we're going to visit some adverbs and how they actually conceptualize a hypothetical native English speaker in the actually hiring policies, especially for the managers who actually conduct these hiring actually policies. The second myth, native speakers are meant to be better teachers out of birth. They have these natural skills, unlike non-native speakers, including us. And all these actual means are interrelated. We cannot separate one from the others, as you will see later in the presentation. The third one will be about native speakers are automatically, naturally good, right? Standard English users. They use English correctly. We're going to visit this myth and see whether this is correct, whether this has any scientific and real-world English basis, foundation. The number 4, they are the norm providers, right? So their norms are correct. Their norms should be actually followed, especially by the language learners who have nothing to do with English outside the school context. So if you know Kakru's circles, it refers to these expanding circle countries, and it includes the context of Thai educational domains and Turkey as well. Another one, which is widely held by my students, especially in listening classes. Native English speakers are necessarily the most intelligible speaker group. So they should feature in listening files, in audio-visual materials, in videos that are going to be used in classes. And finally, along with these myths, we have these culture teaching, right? Whose culture are we going to teach in the classes? Again, the myth goes as follows. It should be inner circle cultures, native English speaking cultures, dominantly British culture and American culture. Now, one by one, let's go into deep, like delve into deep and visit these notions first. But firstly, look, the title says the myth of native speakers, right? How can we understand the term myth? So the dictionary meaning, as you see, there are 3 types of different meanings actually stated in Merriam-Webster. And the first one goes as follows: an unfounded or false notion, right, which cannot be actually evidenced, proven with scientific conclusions actually. The example, the myth of a native speaker superiority over who are non-natives. It doesn't matter the nationality, Turkish, Thai, or let's say German, French, non-native. A person, look, this is much more important for us, a person having only an imaginary or unverifiable existence. Imaginary, something that we actually hypothetically create in our minds, in our perceptions, and transform such kind of actually existence into beliefs, right? They are the best speakers. Their accents are good. So we actually form strong, entrenched beliefs that we rarely question. We often take them for granted, right? They're already assumed. Nobody questions them. And the final one, a widely held but false belief. Right? Widely held, yes, most people might actually hold this belief, but it is probably false. It does not reflect the reality. And maybe the key notion that goes together with this definition is native speaker fallacy. And also Galloway is using the term native speaker episteme, right? The legacy. Now, I have a question for the audience. These are all my Facebook friends. Some of them are native English speakers, but all of them are native speakers of their languages. So if you ask, which of these speakers might be a native English speaker? So what would be the response? Probably first thing you're gonna do to eliminate Dr. Yusuf here. As you already know his background. So I didn't actually order them in numbers, but this is just kind of a warm-up, right? What comes to our mind when we see probably most speakers will eliminate my friend here because of his skin color, right? And Ying Wang, again, a colleague of us from Southampton, will be probably eliminated because of her eyes, not maybe because of its, her color. And this is another friend living in London, but originally from Pakistan, Adnan. Even the name, right? When I just say the name, you will notice that he cannot be a actually native English speaker. How about this lady? If there are any guesses, maybe you might just use the chat box and Dr. Yusuf might tell me. But if you have familiarity with different European countries and if you have friends, you might maybe just say she is a candidate, right, to be a native English speaker. But in fact, she is originally from German. So she's German. And we have another nice, beautiful lady here. Alicia from Italy. And the only native speaker is this old man, Alex. Now let's see the first myth. But before that, let me just visit the dictionary definition, right? Because most of the scholarly definitions have some overlaps with the dictionary meaning. So how does the dictionaries actually? More or less, I just used Merriam-Webster, but I also visited the other, dictionaries. More or less, they have similar explanations and similar descriptions of a native speaker. So Merriam defines a native English speaker. Look, this is relevant not for English native speakers, even for Thai native speakers, because the focus is on native speaker, not English native speaker. So often they refer to the place, like the location where that person was born, right, as a child. So if you know Kreshner's hypothesis, the difference between learning and acquisition, if you're a native speaker of a language, that means you have acquired the language, right, from birth, as a child. You have now actually formal study background, like we had. You did not study it at school. You did not go through like course books, materials, assessment. You're going to learn it, speak the language of the place where you were born. But this is problematic. What if a Nigerian child, right, who was born and raised in the UK, especially in the ELT sector, people see that actually person as a native or non-native? There's a huge question mark. And in contrast to this definition, non-native speakers are actually referred to as not born or raised in the place where a particular language, right, in our case, English, is spoken. And there's also a specific explicit example in brackets. A person who speaks English but whose native language is not English. Specifically, there is a reference to non-native English speakers. Some technical definitions from well-known scholars. David Crystal, very famous for his books on global Englishes, The Spread of English, English on the Internet. Look, there is a similar actually approach, someone for whom a particular language is a first language or mother tongue, right? So again, the natural process of language acquisition, which should be acquired naturally and during childhood. And maybe this is the most important one in scholarly actual definitions. These speakers are assumed to have this reliable intuition, right? They can make judgments, what is correct, what is incorrect, especially they apply these rules through intuition, right? If you ask an ordinary, a typical native English speaker, what's the difference between that tense and this tense in terms of, grammar, probably you won't get a satisfactory explanation. The reason, they have this intuition because of these natural language acquisition processes. And maybe what matters most in language teaching field, their judgments, right, about the way language is used, often considered to be trusted by learners and by the teachers, right? Therefore, they're considered to be the role models, the ultimate role model for language learners for a long time. But now things have started to change. There's also a shift to alternative models. We're going to see them later in the presentation. As you see, even some scholars actually develop certain characteristics or certain criteria. Okay, they just thought, okay, a native English speaker should have these criteria. Look here, there are like 7 criteria. Again, similar expressions. An English-speaking country, UK, the United States, New Zealand, Australia. Acquisition, right, in childhood, from family through mostly, speaks as first language. But sometimes even these, term first language might be problematic. The reason, currently we have lots of bilingual and plurilingual children, right? Especially in European countries. In countries like India, Pakistan, regional languages. So it's not so easy to determine one's first language. Let me give you an example. We have lots of Turkish, German people living in Germany, and at home they speak Turkish. At school, outside the home environment, they are just engaging with German, and their Turkish is mostly broken. So what is their first language, Turkish or German? It is very blurry. It's not so easy to make a clear-cut actually choice for the first languages in such cases. But you might just see the date. It's maybe like almost 20 years ago. So things have just changed. Also, there's this expectation of native-like command of English, right? Native-like command. By which I guess what is meant is fluency, automaticity, like easily that person can use idiomatic expressions, can understand almost any type of speakers, the variants. And look, this is also important, using the language creatively. But we might also use the language creatively. Non-native speakers might also do some of the actually criteria here. They might also meet some criteria here. So these are not very decisive. But maybe reliable intuition, something that is actually earned through this kind of language acquisition process in childhood. Yeah. But Davis, again, just determined 4 actual criteria to describe a native English speaker. Similar processes: acquisition of the language in childhood, understanding, accurately producing idiomatic forms of the language. But maybe we don't have these actually idiomatic knowledge from our birth, but they might be learned. Again, most of the advanced, proficient, non-native speakers might fulfill certain criteria actually stated by these scholars. So maybe, I guess, our explicit knowledge in terms of differentiating, understanding different forms of language is far better than native speakers, like varieties, intelligibility with different accents, and competent production and comprehension of fluent, spontaneous discourse. For this, being a native speaker, I guess, is not enough, right? You have to have good communicative strategies. And also this hypothetical native speaker, who is this? Educated, non-educated, from a rural background, from an urban background. There's not actually such specification here. So, number 1, the myth. Who is a native speaker? And the research, scholarly research, points to the fact that often the notion of native English speaker, a kind of a proxy of whiteness, right? You should have a white face. That's the expectation. First thing first, especially from the perspectives of teachers, and mostly from the expectations of students, learners, right, who are learning English. If you show my face, right, in a private college here, somewhere in Turkey, they won't accept me as a native English speaker. Why? Because I don't actually fulfill the criteria of being white, right? Or having a kind of a white face. And especially if we just delve into some more details, someone white and Western looking. Yeah, we had this lady here, right? White, but she does not look Western, right? So even whiteness is not enough on its own. So even certain names, let's see, you have a white face, you sound like a native speaker, you were raised in London, but your name is Adnan Yusuf Ali. Even it might be a kind of a problem, right? And there's also research that proves this. The recruiters, right, in the job hiring actually sector, they rejected even inner circle native speaker applicants, the candidates, because of their non-Anglo-Saxon ethnicity. Yes, African English, African British. So even the names might play a great role while seeking or while actually involved in this job hunting process. And this is quite actually discriminatory and sometimes even racist. There are also different lots of other, social justice issue problems. Yeah. I'm going to show you an ad from Thailand. Just take a look at the ad. I hope you're going to see the important part and you're going to see or notice the discrimination. Please focus on the payment part. Private lesson. For natives, a different amount of money. For Europeans, for Asian, 250. Look, the native double the prices here. They're gonna do the same job.
I think maybe this, Ali, actually regarding the payment of the Asians, I mean, it's somehow better than my own experience. Yeah, I mean, some of the private institution asked me, to be a part of their teams, and when we discuss about the payment, it what really surprised me a lot. They just pay me like 100 baht per hour.
So probably they pay attention to your academic background. Dr. Yusuf, productive, PhD, a well-known, promising scholar. So you might be benefiting from your accumulated academic background, maybe, but this is the general mindset. Of course, there are differences. There's exceptions, but in most ads, even in Turkey, most of the state sector, right? I'm going to show you something from a Turkish university, which I find quite surprising, because in that university and in the particular program, there are lots of researchers who has expertise in ELF, global Englishes, and still in the job actually adverts, they highlight being a native or native-like fluency or having a native-like fluency. So look, even the visual, when we look at the visual, you see it fits our description. A white guy, European looking, not slanted.
Mhm.
Look, holding a kind of a thick book, probably a dictionary or it may be a grammar manual. Expert, extending the arm. Come and learn English with me, the best teacher, the expert. There are hidden messages to the learners. And this is also common. There are the different online platforms where your children can get one-to-one classes. And if you want your children to get classes with native English speakers, the price is different. If you want your children to get classes with Filipino teachers from Philippines, the price is almost half.
Yeah.
So my daughter is getting such kind of classes. Previously, she would get classes with native speakers, but due to the increasing, the difference between Turkish currency and European currency dollar, now she's having classes with Filipino teachers. Even a young, child, my daughter wants to have classes with native English speakers. Why? Because she had her first familiarity with these speakers, right? The other accent, the other pronunciation sounds so strange and weird to her. She's just around like 6 years old. Now, I want her to get familiar with different accents so that she wouldn't develop these prejudices. She might be actually, notice that she can speak English with anyone with different accents, with different facial, physical appearances. This is that actually I just briefly mentioned. Look, one of the top universities in Turkey, Boğaziçi University. The medium of instruction is English, and unlike most universities, they have the right to give their own ads. Normally, we have a Council of Higher Education. They actually advertise for the stuff. But look, there are lots of qualifications stated here. I'm going to just take a look at them briefly. But look at the first one. It immediately starts with the statement, candidates must have native or native-like fluency in English with demonstrable skills of oral and written communication. Look, it does not start primarily with a PhD. It comes later, the secondary. Later on, applicants must have strong commitment to undergraduate education, university level. Look, experience comes maybe third or as a fourth criterion here. Experience. Research skill, the final one stated. So do you think this is something random? Why not starting the ad with these university level experience and just place candidates at the end? No, this is the top priority. You might have all these other criteria, but first thing first, they're going to check your fluency, pronunciation, your oral skills. But the thing they don't actually mention, who is the benchmark here? The native. The native on TV programs, TV presenters, in TV series, who are using non-standing English, slang, colloquial English, probably an educated native speaker, right? Are speaking maybe RP or the general American English. And in this department, there are a couple of researchers very well known in the field of ELF and global Englishes. That was quite surprising seeing that ad. So maybe they have no say, right, to be able to change such kind of adverts or the qualifications, because I don't know the background. This is just what they advertise on their website. Let's take a look at the worldwide, actually, right? Job hiring policies. How these actually policies limit the employability of non-native but qualified English language teachers. Most research comes from this Mahbub, Clark. So again, even in English-speaking countries, most of these private actually, colleges or tutors, there are lots of students, right? People going there for summer, for language courses, just to be able to improve their English. Again, most of these actual language schools seek native English-speaking teachers. And the highest demand is in the UK, is you see 72, almost 73 of the adverts state explicitly they are looking for native English-speaking teachers. And what is also interesting is there is not much reference to their academic background, right? Professional competence, practitioner competence, whether they have a diploma in English language teaching. Often the misperception is that if you're a native English speaking teacher, you can teach the language. But I guess you all can imagine it's not that simple, right? My parents, perfect Turkish speakers, can they teach Turkish to foreigners? Of course, definitely a big no. Why? They don't have the expertise, right? They don't have a licensure like diploma, the required education, the pedagogical knowledge. Just speaking a language does not make you a teacher.
Yeah.
There are lots of other actually requirements, right? Knowledge base, for example. What is the knowledge base of these speakers? Did they get any methodological classes teaching English to young learners, right? Assessing English, assessment is part of teaching. So we got classes during our actually BA times, right? We got classes on assessment. We get class on language acquisition processes, the developmental differences based on age groups. So you cannot teach English to the children in the way that you teach to adults. Age groups are different, right? Personal characteristics are different. So you have to diversify your teaching practices, which might be done through training. So professional training, I mean. From Mahboob's and Golden's findings, again, they actually analyzed lots of adverts for language teaching profession, and nativeness was the single most frequent criterion. Nativeness being or having a kind of a linguistic background in an English-speaking country, but that wasn't enough. They even specified the countries, right? Let's say you're from Ghana, a former colony of British Empire, right? They speak English, it's a formal language. Can you say Ghana here at least? No. If you have a Ghanaian background, Nigerian background, you cannot apply for the position. Australia, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, South Africa, UK, US, and in most or in some, just UK and US. Look, interestingly, South Africa is there, but not in all actually adverse, in some. Now, how can we demystify, right? Because most of these actually policies, practices, or the privilege given to native English speakers in these, employment processes do not have a scientific basis. They only act based on someone's linguistic background rather than their practitioner competence, right? Whether someone is fit for the position, whether someone has the required qualifications. This is not a big issue. It seems so in the job market, actually. So first thing first, it is not so easy to determine who is a native speaker, who is not. Because as I earlier said, people are becoming more and more bilingual, learning more than 2 or 3 languages, especially in the European context. Borderless policy, right? They might move, they learn a couple of additional languages as second and third at schools. And we sometimes forget to think about certain other issues, right? That is actually very important while describing whether someone is native or not. Nation. How about this interfaith, international marriages? The dad is Thai, the mom is German, the child can also speak English, 3 languages. In which case, I guess being a native speaker of Italian, German, or English does not matter, right? What matters is the most effective use of the languages, right? The country, the birth. You might have a birth like in London, but if you're not surrounded by that particular community, probably you won't acquire the language. This is also a case. There are lots of instances like this. Now, and actually, all these discussions and even the definitions you're going to see, they are outdated, like 15 years ago, 20 years ago. These were the hotly debated issues. But currently, the attention has actually shifted towards proficiency-based descriptions, right? Okay, you might be a native English speaker, but do you have this pragmatic competence, which is quite important in intercultural encounters, in intercultural communication, especially this strategic competence. And research also provides evidence that mostly monolingual native English speakers lack these actual skills and competences, especially discourse competence, right? How to fix, how to eliminate communication or likely communication breakdowns in speech. Often, the expectation is that native English speakers based on research, they want the others, right, to make efforts to understand themselves. But communication is a two-way phenomenon, right? Listener and hearer, they need to collaborate. Yes, I should make myself clear. I should try to avoid making some kind of, or creating some kind of communication breakdowns. But however, the listener should also make attempt, right? The share of the communicative burden by the speakers. So this is what matters, rather than whether you have a certain linguistic background, native or non-native. This is no longer relevant. To what extent you have improved your skills, right? Your actual strategies, like pragmatic strategies, communicative strategies, or to what extent you can successfully engage in intercultural communication. To what extent you can tolerate unknown, unfamiliarity, differences and divergences in the use of English by the others. So there are lots of problems with these actually two notions. Therefore, currently people rarely talk on these differences, who is better, who is not. Now the focus is actually being more and more proficient, like being a proficient user. So they just look at, okay, who might be proficient user, certain characteristics. So nativeness or non-nativeness is not a determinative or decisive criterion here. And all these actually features, as I told you, like the 7 features, the 5 features defined by Devious, these are neither necessary right now nor present in all average native English speakers. A native English speaker without a proper education, a plumber, let's say, cannot meet the actually criteria mentioned or described by these scholars. And even in research, non-native English speakers, especially in these listening, perceptional or attitudinal studies, they might be taken as native English speakers, and some native English speakers are actually perceived to be non-native English speakers. Why? Because we forget the fact that there are divergences, right? Because we're actually in the education domain, our focus is on the standard. We just think that there's this hypothetical standard. It is valid, it is apparent everywhere, but in real world communication, there is almost no standard. Each individual unique speaker, even from the same language, right? Turkish speakers, in our case, do all Turkish speakers speak Turkish in the same way? No, there are lots of differences, regional differences, gender-based differences, for example, even local differences in a certain particular region. So this is something we actually ignore when it comes to the educational domain. Our attention is immediately directed towards looking for something standard. When you just get used to the standard, you feel lost when you come across non-standard or substandard. So there's also this, again, a social justice issue, right? Impartial, unfair representation of certain groups at the expense of others. For example, power ascribed to native English speakers, right? Which is something actually considered to be lacking in non-native English speakers. Learners, students develop lots of stereotypes, especially this is very visible in attitudinal studies. A non-native speaker, teacher cannot speak English properly. In most research papers, you're going to see their accent is not so posh. They are not so prestigious. But currently, such kind of perceptions are also slowly changing because learners' expectations have started to change. This is something I'm going to touch on briefly later when it comes to these, the issues around language teaching methodology and how actually these myths originated in the first place, how the actually people or students, mostly and language teachers, adopted or just subscribed to such kind of ideologies, strong beliefs about native and non-native speakers, especially such deficit perspective, right? Lifelong apprenticeship for the non-native speakers and non-native speaking teachers. Lifelong apprenticeship, this is very actually derogatory because whatever you do, you'll be like an apprenticeship all the time. That means you will always have something to learn from the master. And master in our case, I guess what is meant to be, who is meant to be master? Native English speakers. You can be just an apprentice. And currently, again, these terms are not very representative. It implies like there is a specific group, non-native speakers, but non-native speakers diverse. outside these inner circle countries. The rest, we might be just categorized non-native, but there are thousands of differences across these non-native speakers. But we might just take them like one single homogeneous group, non-native speakers. No, there are loads of differences. And these differences actually originate from their L1 background, mother tongues. Our mother tongue necessarily and naturally influences the way we utter sentences, right? Mostly based on phonology. Certain sounds might not exist in your language, right? So probably you will go to the closest sound. You'll replace it with something else, which will already give away some kind of information about your identity, right? Identity marker. L1. I sound like a Turkish speaker to my students. When Dr. Yusuf speaks, he sounds quite different because he's originally Thai English speaker. A German speaker probably will sound different. But the general term, non-native speaker, applies to all of us. Something I already mentioned, so I'm going to skip it. Monolingualism. Currently, almost monolingualism is an obsolete term because we might even consider learners who are learning English bilinguals because there are different categorization of bilinguals, so they might fit into a certain category. Let's move on to the second myth. Native English speakers are better teachers. Now, we have just described native English speakers, whiteness, how they're actually privileged in employment. Now, what makes them better teachers? Let's see. Most of all, up until 1990s, I don't know whether you have had any methodology classes. I'm offering a course. Here, let me just show you the course book. Teaching principles in language teaching. Here, there are these mainstream approaches and methods that student teachers or teachers might use when they become teacher. And in all of these methods, actually, there's a strong emphasis on native speaker competence, and it's often set as a kind of a model for learners, like long-term objective. You have to make or help your learners reach native speaker competence. But when you just check the background, the historical trajectory of these methods and approaches, you see that they just date back to 1970s, 1960s, audiolingual methods, direct method. Maybe the most recent one, communicative language teaching. But again, at the center of communicative language teaching is the idea that learners will be to have this communicative competence. But again, the benchmark, the yardstick is native English speakers' competence. Again, these are still obsolete. If you just impose such kind of ideologies to the student teachers, of course, they're going to follow them when they become teachers. And they're also influenced by their previous language learning experiences at schools. The course book, how do the course books portray the speakers, their cultures? There are some local course books here in Turkey. When you look at the dialogues, the context is in Turkey, right? It's a shopping mall. A group of people are having a conversation. The funny thing, the course book writers are Turkish. The conversational setting is in Turkey, but none of the speakers are named with a Turkish name. They have all these European names or native English speaking names, but they're in Turkey doing shopping in a shopping mall, but none of them is a Turkish. This is the mindset, right? It's something like a language which might be spoken by native speakers. We will just try to imitate the ways they use language and reach the competence if we can. And in parallel with this, if you depart from their performance, right, their norms, the rules, you will be easily and immediately labeled as a failure. Or your linguistic actually competence will be actually seen like lacking some kind of professionalism, a kind of a linguistic deficit approach because of your divergences, your differences. But rarely the attention is paid. Why learners depart from these norms, right? As earlier again I said, for example, just a basic and simple example, plural s. Our understanding of plural and singular is quite different from the British understanding. For sugar, for example, right? Some sugar, a bowl of sugar, but here in Turkey, in Turkish, we might pluralize the word sugar. So immediately the learners tend to pluralize, even in English. Just a basic example. So we cannot ignore the existence of our first language and just think that learners will just construct something very new. No, whatever learners construct, they construct it on what they already have. So our second, third, fourth, it doesn't matter. Whatever you're going to learn, you're going to construct it on your prior knowledge. So it's the basement, right? Let's just consider like a building. The basement is our mother tongue. So the basement will influence the rest of the floors actually. Often they're actually appreciated because of their intuitive linguistic knowledge, right? Fluency, automaticity in speech, pronunciation, accent. But believe me, previously I would offer these listening classes, and learners often had trouble in understanding native speakers because I brought lots of authentic video clips. They are used to these coursebook series, right? Coursebooks specifically prepared for language teaching in non-native context. The speakers are very fluent. They speak very slowly. But the problem, such kind of interactions do not reflect real-world communication. In real-world communication, we have fast speakers, right? We have slow speakers, speakers with deep voice, creaky voice. So if our purpose is to prepare learners for real-life English communication, we should do our best, at least to catch a little or maybe a short snap of real-world English communication in our classes. If you just use the only coursebook accompanied, see these videos, they are not that much representative. They portray a different picture about English. And when students actually face or find themselves in a real-world English communication setting, they're hesitant to speak. They lose their willingness to communicate. And let's move to this native English speaking teacher and non-native English speaker debate, right? So research actually shows currently they have certain advantages. And in terms of students' preferences about these teachers, they often focus on their strengths and weaknesses. But the scholarly actual research and arguments right now actually state that what makes one a good teacher is not about being a native English speaker or non-native English speaker. So what is that? What is it then? Professional competence and development, which might be acquired through teacher education, right? Teacher education courses, teacher education training. And even in some of these native English speakers working at these non-native contexts hold certain certificates, right? Delta, CELTA, but maybe you only know it. These are very short-term programs. Just takes maybe 3 months. There's also a program which lasts only 1 month. How about our case? In our department, we train language teachers, future language teachers. The program takes 4 years. And they get different courses on subject, courses related to English, courses related to teaching, like classroom management, educational psychology, exam preparation, materials design. These are all the courses we offer here, right? Learners, students need to be actually knowledgeable about these areas so that they can actually design their own materials, right? They can properly assess their learners' progress. This is something ignored when it comes to native English speakers. Just 1 month or 3 month courses, they have these CELTA, but the BA background, philosophy. A graduate of international relations, working as a lecturer at a Turkish university. Why? That person, first of all, a native English speaker. Secondly, holds a CELTA or Delta certificate. But in our case, let's imagine I'm a graduate of psychology department. I have a Delta and CELTA as a Turkish student. Do you think they will let me teach English at a higher education? No. They will ask a diploma from me. A bachelor's degree in English major, right? In English language teaching. So the knowledge base of the teacher, like in line with this professional competence, we have to see, okay, whether that person have these qualifications. Pedagogic subject matter. How to teach, for example, vocabulary. What do you know about it? The phases of vocabulary teaching. The phase of listening, for example, pre-listening activities, while listening, post-listening. All these stages are important. And lots of technical terms, like how to activate learners' schemata, previous background knowledge, because which is going to prepare learners for the upcoming content in classes. So this is something from my own findings with a couple of actually colleagues previously. Here, in this study, the different thing was most of the previous studies actually measures, students' preferences and perceptions about native and native based on their unfamiliarity. Most of these students in the previous actually studies had no familiarity with native English speakers, right? They made hypothetical judgments. But in our case, this study was carried out at a private university, and the students had classes with actual native English speaking teachers. So they have this first-hand experience. They also have Turkish and teachers from neighboring countries like Iran. So this is what they just actually said in terms of the strengths. Look, speaking like oral skills, something expected. Look, personal characteristics. Native English speakers are considered to be very cool, charismatic, outgoing, easily approachable, sociable, and exciting feelings of humiliation. Cultural ambassador. This is something, again, we're going to discuss. They are seen to be expert also at the culture of the language. They are seen as good model, like practicing a requirement for speaking English. They are good at methodology and teaching skills. Look, this is what actually opposed to what I just said. So this is learners and the participants, so perception. Openness to other countries and cultures, encouraging students to speak more, for example, inspiring. So in the case of non-native English speakers, in terms of their strengths, we might just see that they focus on this shared non-natives, right? Shared teachers can understand student life. This teacher has knowledge about the student's culture, right? Can behave appropriately. This is quite important, right? Because if you hire someone from a Western context, there might be some kind of cultural clashes while talking about certain cultural norms and values. What is acceptable in the Turkish context might not be quite acceptable in a Western context, right? Kinexis, proximity, how close we might be with someone else, whether we can touch somebody easily or not. Especially in countries like Islamic countries, hugging is a very common practice, right? Between close friends, family members, kissing the cheeks. But these are not so widespread in most Western countries. There's also this, ease of communication with these teachers because they share the same L1, can better teach English to students, can provide extra help. Why? If there's something very complicated, that speaker can speak the language, right? Code switch, code mix, translanguage, for example. And similarly, in terms of their weaknesses, let's first take a look at non-native English speakers' weaknesses from the perspectives of learners. Look, they create a fear of comprehension. Do you know the reason why they think so? Because they feel that they're going to make a mistake and they will be judged by a native English speaker. And that native speaker is the authority. So they actually develop extra anxiety. Create a feeling of humiliation. May not teach English effectively. Here, what is meant by English is mostly grammar. Students are very suspicious about whether they can learn English grammar from native English speakers because they have this intuitive knowledge. If they have no pedagogical background about grammar, how to teach grammar, they lack these skills. Unrealistic expectation, right, from the learners, from the school. Can be out of touch with students. Can say or do inappropriate things. Look, students pay attention to such kind of sensitive issues in classes. Can overvalue themselves in the host culture, like overvalue. Can be too arrogant and self-opinionated. Again, this is what learners actually said. All these actually characteristics comes from their quotations, actual words. So how about the weaknesses of non-native English speaking teachers? Cannot speak like native English, foreign accented, ordinary, like ordinary people, but actually most of them have these professional background. Can overuse L1. In most cases, unfortunately, this is true. Can be overly mechanical, right? Since they feel that they can't use English properly or accurately, the teachers mostly refer to or switch to English in classes. And teaching grammar, they find it quite easier and safer. So rather than focusing on these productive skills, they tend to place extra or heavy emphasis on teaching grammar. Dependent on textbooks, again, this is the perception about non-native English speaking teachers, can reproduce mistakes or bad pronunciation. So all these actual weaknesses and strengths come or based on students' expectations. So if you focus on grammar, probably you're gonna appreciate native English speaker, right? Non-native. If you're actually very concerned about pronunciation, you might go for native English speaking teacher. But there might be some differences based on where the study is carried out. This is the findings, but more or less similar results might be seen in the literature, very similar results. So are things changing right now in terms of these kind of actually preferences for teachers, or should change? Maybe I should reword the question. Do we actually need to set new goals, right, for the learners? Is a native accent more intelligible? Another myth, right? Why is the native accent no longer relevant? So we have to, especially with teacher candidates, discuss these questions. When they start discussing, they actually go through this moment of eye-opening, because often they just never question such, or they don't think about such questions actually. They have their beliefs that actually they acquired previously, and they always just think they're true. But when you just create a kind of a discussion environment or group time and ask such questions, they come up with interesting responses because they engage in this meta-linguistic discussion, right? Reflect on the current states of English, who is using English. And I also ask them, where are you going to use English? Since they're going to be language teachers, mostly in the classroom. Within the Turkish borders, right? Mostly with non-native speakers like immigrants, international students, but tourists, it's simple, right? Tourists, there are lots of tourists. So they keep questioning, okay, why speaking with a tourist, let's say from Russia? To what extent having a native accent play a great role? And they say it doesn't matter actually, right? So why do you hold this idea? Oh, this is what we were told, right? By the teachers previously. This is how actually English was propagated to us through the course books, through the accompanied like materials, worksheets, workbooks. And Guy Cook says the acceptance, right, by learners of the native speaker model does not mean these attitudes are right. Yes, they might have these perceptions, attitudes, they might be biased or prejudiced, but it doesn't mean that such kind of actually approaches to native or not native Englishes are right. The reason, as I actually noted again, professional development matters much more right now. Even the students and the learners now have started to look for professional development, right? How qualified their teachers are. To what extent they can benefit, right, from their teachers. Personality, sometimes personality plays a greater role than being a native speaker, because currently the learners are quite different from the learners in 90s or 2000s, the beginnings. They like to have these humanistic relations, right? They like to be accepted by their teachers. And the teacher's authority, right? The role of the teacher has changed a lot. Well, currently we don't have these strict, harsh teachers. Now we have these friendly relations. Of course, there's this borderline. We cannot be like actual friends because we are their teachers. We have different actual authority, like we are assessing them, marking them. But the kind of relations have changed dramatically. Students' expectations have changed as well. And now lots of departments, qualified teacher trainers, and in terms of professional development, after becoming a teacher, there are lots of ongoing seminars and professional development actually training programs. CPD, continuous professional development, especially it's provided by the Ministry of National Education here in Turkey. So teachers have always a chance to develop their skills. It might be linguistic skills, it might be related to communicative skills, personal skills, or pedagogical didactic skills. There are always actually programs where, if the teacher is willing to improve himself, herself, he or she find any kind of opportunity right now. And currently, yes, they might be still dominate the ELT field, the job hiring policies, but what is crystal clear is right now, native English speakers may not necessarily provide the best model, because the best model currently is not a native speaker. There should be different alternatives. If I'm going to have an intercultural communication with different speakers at different settings, we should have something different, right? Because how are we going to deal with these differences? It requires certain skills. management, right? So strategies, communicative, effective strategies to eliminate the negative impacts of these differences in the communicative settings. Another myth: native English speakers are good English users, standard English users. Standard English refers to this grammatical correctness mostly. There's much more sophisticated definitions, but no need to delve into it depth actually. So they make no grammatical mistakes, they sound clear, nice, they speak fluently, coherently. And here's a link. Let's visit the link together. Look, this myth is everywhere. So the internet is very slow. I guess you can hear me clear, right? Without any cuts. Look, a kind of website, why learning from a native speaker is always better. Here, learning from the best is important when it comes to language, right? So native English speakers are seen the best. So if you're going to learn English, you should learn it from native. There are thousands of websites similar to this one, right? There are lots of actually positive connotations associated with being a native English speaker, authenticity, blah, blah, blah. This is just one single example. Understanding the culture, the cultural ambassadors, they can reflect their culture into the classroom environment. But let's see some real world English language usages later in movies, right? In songs. Complementary to the myth 3, we have these native English speakers are the known provider, right? They said their usage is actually taken as a benchmark to be followed by the learners in language teaching situations. But what norms? How about these non-standard native usages? So I'm going to show you some kind of language usages from native speakers, but well-known native speakers, celebrity. But before that, I'd like to show the common mindset among learners. Again, this comes from one of my students in a writing class. Good English is a language which is used and spoken perfectly by their native speaker. Look, they are good English users. So that makes us bad English users. If we just think the opposite in this continuum, there shouldn't be any grammatical mistake. Even in students writing, there are lots of grammatical mistakes, but I can understand, I don't care about the grammatical mistakes. But the student's expectation, there shouldn't be any grammatical mistake. Speaking should be very fluently. On the other hand, in writing language words, grammatical rules should be used correctly. So that actually leaves, right, native English speakers out of the league of being a good English speaker. You can be just an ordinary, not a good one, English speaker. But this is what I call this, right? The standard, non-standard in real world communication. How? I guess maybe if you're interested in music, songs, you might know this song. Pink Floyd, a British band, 1960s. You see, in grammar classes, our teachers would teach us we cannot use two negatives in a sentence, right? Look, we don't need no education. The standard grammar probably states we don't need any education. We don't need, again, teachers, leave them kids alone. An object pronoun here. And then another object again. Right? Leave those or leave these kids alone, but this is just a song. And this is ungrammatical from a standard English perspective. Does it change the meaning? Do we fail to understand what is actually being tried to meant here by this singer? I guess the meaning is clear, right? It's just the mechanics. Again, I can't get no satisfaction. The Rolling Stones, another band. The use of ain't in songs is becoming increasingly popular and widespread. I ain't your mama, for example. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, Elvis Presley. But have you ever seen ain't in a course book, in a video that is actually played in the classroom? Probably no, especially in lower levels like secondary, high school, maybe at the university level. Teachers might take some initiative and bring in their own videos. Maybe they might just familiarize learners. But this is how in real world English is used. How about this? This is a movie transcript. And Dr. Yusuf, I guess you're gonna guess the name of the movie because I know that you're expert at movies. What do you think? From which movie this transcript comes? Look, there are lots of ungrammatical expressions. With them, where is the B? Passive voice, right? This conversation never having taken place. Something is missing. Will labeled. Where is the B again? You as rough extremist. Where is the indefinite article a as a rough extremist? Dr. Yusuf, any guesses about the movie name? Mission.
Yeah.
Mission Impossible. Ghost Protocol. Look at the expression, where as to might I go? If one of my students say this, probably I'll be shocked. Where as to might I go? As you see, these are all native English actors, actresses, and this is how they use language in real lives. And what we are trying to do is, okay, we're going to add be, past participles of the verb, blah, blah, blah. And the end result, I'm just speaking for the Turkish context. I don't know much about Thai context. We have students who cannot speak English after 10 years of language training, language education. Probably something is wrong in the way that we teach English. Look, in the ad land, in the sector of advertisement, you will rarely see standard English. Experience amazing, right? Normally the rule says if you're going to use verb, you cannot use it. There are certain, yes, adjectives you might use, but verbs are modified by adverbs, right? Leave your unexpected, find your happy. Find your happiness, maybe grammatically much more correct. Eat more amazing, start your impossible. And even there are books written by native English speakers debunking the myth of a pure standard English. There is no such English actually. It only exists in course book. In this one, yes, you might just see. It's completely written in standard English. There is not a single grammatical mistake. But if you get some stories, novels, you're going to see lots of non-standard usages, local sayings, for example. Another myth, native English speakers are necessarily most intelligible one. So how does this myth translate into teaching practices or teaching environments? Mostly the inclusion of native English speakers in the voiceover of the sound files, right? In the videos. Recently, I was just looking at some course books to find out some different, listening files. The name of the course book is Speak Out. The Speak Out also these video sections, all of the videos come from BBC, which includes like interviews, group talk, and they're all based in London. They all feature native English speaking, speakers actually. And the course book says it's an international course book. How international is that course book? Just using the catchy phrase international doesn't make it international actually. So again, in most of these previous studies, there is a high rating for these native English speaker accents, right? They are desirable, they are prestigious. These people are found to be more friendly. And in a position, non-native speakers mostly seen as not nice, not their accents actually in listenings, or unintelligible. But is this the case? Because often students make these assumptions based on their unfamiliarity. When they had familiarity, when they had first-hand experience, their attitudes tend to change. As I told you earlier, in my listening classes, students mostly had trouble in understanding native speaker dominated videos, native speaker dominated expressions. I'll show you some quotes later. So look, again, one of my MA students is carrying out a kind of research into course books. And she's interested in finding out the representation of accents in the listening files. Look here. In Unlock, the name of the course book, out of 125 accents, almost around 100 represents RP, British, Southern British English. Look, even American English is very, underrepresented. Similarly, speak out. Just a couple of different accents in the course book. The majority, again, consists of RP. Because this is the reflection of these made, right, in teaching resources, in teaching materials. If you think they're most intelligible, of course, you're going to include these speakers mostly in your listening files, in your listening text. How about the nature, the direction of interaction, right? Again, when we look at the nature of directions, the course book provides lots of native speaker interactions, also native speaker, non-native speaker interaction, but here the context is again in an English-speaking country, so native speakers are seen the only interlocutors. Let's take a look at the nature of interactions between non-natives. Very limited in the Speak Out course book. There is no even an instance. Again, this is again a wrong misperception about who speaks English, right? Mostly English is spoken when we just consider the figures of speakers among non-native speakers. And again, this myth also is reflected in speaker and accent preferences in listening activities. If you ask the learners, would you like to listen to native English speakers and non-native English speakers in your listening classes? In my case, most students actually opted to listen native English speakers. And here are some of the actual ideas why they actually chose to listen to native English, because they think they are intelligible, right? Their speech is very clear, they speak correct, accurate English, and also they take these speakers as their target model, so they like to be exposed to the ways they speak English. They find them authentic. Authentic often has some association with a certain geographical location. Native English speaker, students often associate them in terms of authenticity with the UK or the United States. And they also ascribe this linguistic superiority, mostly because of their intuitive knowledge and fluency. Also, this personal stuff, right? Pleasantness. They like their accents. But the small number of students who just actually opted for non-native English speakers in listening activities, they emphasized comprehensibility. They said these speakers are relatively more comprehensible than native English speakers. They find their speech simple, flexible, and familiar, more importantly. And also, even students said they like different non-native English speakers and their accents. Now, let's see some much more detail in their quotes. The pro-native, right? Those who argue for native accents and native listening speakers in the listening sections. Again, look, correctness, number one. I can understand them more easily. So correctness, native speakers are more intelligible. This is the ideology here. Speak English more correctly, similarly, I can understand, oh, this is the same, sorry, repetition. Their pronunciation is accurate, accuracy. So again, I can understand them easily. So most students have similar actually remarks. Their pronunciation is easy. They speak more correctly. Therefore, they are easily intelligible to the listeners. How about the non-native group? Look, comfortable. Why? Because native English is a lot of rules. Native speakers speak too fast. This is something quite important, right? The pace of delivery in speech. And they rarely modify, right? According to whom you're speaking, sometimes we adjust the way we speak. For example, in my classes, I tend to speak slower because often students complain about my English. Hocam, this is how we address the teachers. Oh, you speak too fast. So I tend to control, right? Because their level of English proficiency is relatively lower than mine. That means I have to modify, right? I have to specifically choose appropriate words which are well known rather than infrequently used words. For example, just a couple of examples, how to modify and accommodate my level to the levels of the students. I'm not able to understand natives, so I like listening to them. So just because, so what was the general perception? They're easily understood, but there's several students who fail to understand these native speakers. Again, in terms of these attractiveness, usefulness, association with culture, and the role of previous teachers, most, not only Turkish students, look, this was from my student, but this is from a general study in a different country. British English, American English is nicer to hear, right? It sounds posh to the ears. Sophisticated, prestigious, aristocratic, lots of positive connotations attached to British English. The proper English, something that I keep hearing from students as well. The proper English. American English is less snobbish, more user-friendly. So this is how actually students perceive these two dominant varieties of English. More frequently used, right? Usefulness. More chances to visit, so practical reasons, instrumental reasons, friends, exposure previous, especially at schools. British culture, right? Intrinsic motivation. I'm into British culture, I'd like to learn more about it, so probably you'll be a pro-British culture, pro-British English. Musical interest, right? My favorite music. I love books by Tolkien, blah, blah, blah. My teacher at school spoke British English. So as teachers, actually, this shows that we have a great role, right? For modeling, for setting certain, actually, goals, objectives for the future language use. We have this lingua franca core, something that I actually keep referring to. Currently, whether somebody sounds like a native, non-native speaker, does not matter much, right? What if you sound like a native speaker, but you cannot convey what you like to mean because your interlocutors, conversation partners, fail to understand you? So here what matters is, rather than just trying to sound like a native speaker, just focus on intelligibility, especially if you're going to have a conversation, engage in a conversation with mostly non-native speakers. Intelligibility becomes the primary concern rather than sounding like a native speaker. So in this lingua franca core, we have certain sounds which have to be mastered properly because they might lead to miscommunication, right? Like long vowels, short vowels. Let me show you an example. Like here, peel and peel, right? Ship and sheep. A sheet of paper, a sheet of paper. You might be misunderstood. These are important, but the TH, in certain languages, we don't have these interdental sounds. So there's no need to insist on these sounds, right? Let's just go for the closest sound, because from the context, the meaning will be self-evident. For the Turkish speakers, for this sound, they often go to the T sound. I think. I think you're right. Does it change the meaning? Does it make any difference? Rather than saying I think, fricative, like a friction at the sides of the mouth, actually. So these should be the concern, right? Especially when it comes to speaking and teaching, listening. Another dominant area, right, where we actually the meat about native speakers is necessarily most intelligible is international tests. When you look at the listening and speaking sections, let's start with TOEFL IBT. It says, okay, the TOEFL IBT includes other native speaker English accents. I took TOEFL IBT, and several people are taking TOEFL IBT, and often they don't even leave their countries, right? They often take it, maybe let's say, to study in an English medium program in their own context, but this is a must. So why should I be, I should be exposed to native speaker English accents only? And they just say, okay, other native English accents in addition to North American accents, like the UK, New Zealand, Australia. This is their understanding of diversity. And they also claim they better reflect the variety of native English accents. But when I took the TOEFL, I'm going to use it for domestic purposes here in Turkey. And probably I won't come across any people from a native English background. Because the assumption is that you'll take the TOEFL and you'll go to an English-speaking country. This is not the case anymore. Yes, it might be among the purposes of taking tests, but it's just one of the several reasons, not the only one. Similarly, the TOEIC test, look, listening section, US, Canadian, British, Australian speakers. And they also express a state many students they develop a bias for a given variety of English and have difficulty understanding speakers with other. So they actually understand the importance of familiarity, right? But the problem, they just familiarize learners with native English speakers and their accents, Canadian, British, Australian speaker. So students be exposed to a variety of English accents, but what variety? Native varieties of English. The only one which actually reflects the current sociolinguistic profile and the status of English is Pearson test of English. At least they mention a range of accents right in the test, from British American, but primarily British American, to non-native speakers. The purpose, so that learners might be exposed to the type of accents they will encounter in everyday life. This is much more realistic, right? But again, look at the wording and the discourse, primarily British and American to non-native speakers, but at least non-native speakers might find place. But if it's like the one that I showed you earlier, like this, it's not very practical actually, right? Very limited representation of different accents, very limited. It also reflects the bias towards these speakers. Our final myth, native English speakers' cultures are the target cultures, right? So the course books, the materials should be designed in a way that would actually impart such kind of culture knowledge to learners. And often the assumption is that native speaker teachers represent this hypothetical Western culture, high culture, as opposed to the low culture of the students. And the teachers who come from this background also considered or perceived to have this superior knowledge of the language plus its culture, also this Western teaching philosophy, right? Western teaching methodology, learner-based, student-centered. It was actually obvious in most student preferences, right? Approachable, fun classes. So the expectations again, and in most policy documents. This is also explicit purpose, right? To teach target culture. And there's less space for outer circle. They might be actually represented, but when it comes to expanding circle, like where English is just taught, used for international purposes, there is a very impartial representation of these speakers and their cultures, especially in teaching materials, in visual supporting aids. This is from a kind of a policy document, the Saudi context. So they make actual reference to the source culture, right? Source culture, learner's own culture, right? To what extent I'm going to see something about my culture in the teaching materials? Because in intercultural meetings, sometimes we feel a need, right, to talk about something local, something that we observe in our local context, but you don't have this specialized vocabulary. Let's say to talk about Ramadan, the festival of sacrifice, right? Eid al-Adha, for example. How are you going to understand the logic behind it? Because this is something not covered in classes. You talk about Halloween, Easter, you talk about some cultural artifacts, Big Bang, blah, blah, blah. But how about your source culture materials? Because in interculture exchanges and communication, we often are also influenced by our cultural norms, right? The way we speak, even the way we use body language, hand gestures might cause some problems. So therefore, source culture should be also part of teaching, in addition to target culture plus international target culture material, right? Certain, let's say, figures from different countries, from different nationalities. But okay, we might include all these types of actual culture materials. How about the understanding of culture? What is culture, for example? The essentialist view of culture sees there is this specific culture, a Turkish culture, British culture, Thai culture. Learners might learn about them. But culture is not something like this. Culture is dynamic, right? Around Christmas time, even in Turkey, you're going to see lots of trees on sale at the shopping malls. Why? Because there is demand for these trees. So buying these trees and placing them at their homes make these people Christian. Probably no. It is something like now we're living in a globalized world. The kids are watching movies. They see such kind of festivals, right? they like to do the same thing. So sometimes there are these just cultural hybrids, right? We might adopt certain things from different cultures, which actually does not make us to conform to their culture, to change our beliefs, faiths. This is a kind of a dynamic, fluid view of culture. There is no culture A separately, culture B. These are intertwined and intermingled, right? Yes, I might adopt something, and it might be part of my cultural norms, for example. So this is also the way we look. We just think, okay, this belongs to Turkish culture. Look, even in Turkish culture, there are lots of differences based on location, based on geographical locations, linguistic background, because we have minority groups. They're also considered Turkish, but their cultural conventions, are quite different. The way they run their weddings, for example, are quite different. But it's also part of Turkish culture. So culture is a very, unique and broad term, and it should be seen not from this essentialist view of culture, like we have this separate culture knowledge. They're all intertwined. They interconnect with each other, right? They intersect. They influence each other as well. So what lies behind the myths about these, right, native English speakers, non-native English, mostly how we were taught English, right? The curricula. English language teachers, mostly were influenced by these teachers, like how they approach teachers, learners, the assessment even, right? The examination boards, as I showed you, the listening sections, the speaking part, and the materials. How we represent, right? You have a course book, and in the course book, you portray the language, right? Through the visuals, through the cultural artifacts, with the accompanied, let's say, listening and video files. You portray a certain type of English in the minds of the course book creators and course book designers. And there's actually a slow change. But such kind of things, these myths and subscribing to these ideologies create a social justice problem, right? Because this is not fair, this is not just, because native speakerism draws on prejudice, stereotyping, and above all, discrimination. In the job market, as I told you, in the listening files, in private tutoring. If you ask the Turkish parents, they would probably go for a foreign teacher, if possible native, at worst, the Turkish English speaker. So because it goes on the idea that a particular group is superior, right? Privileged over the others from different groups. So these such kind of native speakers policies, if they exist not as a policy document and practices, represent a fundamental breach of one's basic human rights. Look, it's even part of this human rights movement. But in certain domains, there are certain actual academic movements which challenge, right, such kind of marginalization and discrimination. In our field, we have these word Englishes, English as a lingua franca, or more generally known as global Englishes, right? Especially they reject these discriminatory approach practices in job hiring and language teaching. They actually suggest certain alternatives, and they also suggest a new paradigm shift with certain English language teaching frameworks. I'm going to skip this. I'd like to immediately go for some of the suggestions because almost my time is up. So rather than setting native English speaker competence, right, as a model, as the ultimate, target, a couple of researchers came up with different alternatives, right? Why not? We should just focus on actually training skilled English users, right? Jenkins, effective communicator, Beza Björkman, intercultural speaker, Will Baker, right? This should be the purpose. So these might come to you too general. So who are these skilled, effective, or intercultural? Despite the differences in the naming, more or less what they mean is these speakers are capable of modifying, right? Accommodating their language use, adapting their languages, depending on the communicative needs, right? What are the needs of these speakers and the interactional setting? So context dependence in situ, right? And with the implementation of strategies, communicative, appropriate, communicative, and pragmatic strategies. So in this case, if you set this goal, being a native, non-native doesn't mean a lot, right? Because this is not the purpose anymore. Expectations are different, and we are much more communication oriented. That's the actually core of the language. Use it, right? Communicate effectively, right? Send and receive messages without communication impediments, problems. So global English language teaching framework, when you look at this framework, you're going to see these native speaker ideology, policy are severely criticized with some alternatives. Like, who is going to be the target speaker? Who might claim the ownership of the language? How should target language be seen, right? Who might be the ideal teacher? Anybody might be ideal teacher, but professional background, professional development, practitioner competence, these are much more important. The norms, role models, you know. So these actually liberate, this framework liberate English, and especially from these hegemonic dominant ideologies and myths about native speakers. Native speakers plus their locations plus the deficit fee. Now, look, even the use of L1 previous approach was very actually derogatory, right? It was seen as a kind of a linguistic deficit because you can't speak, you just switch to Turkish, you just switch to Thai. This is not always the case. It is a kind of a linguistic resource that I actually emphasized earlier. In summary, as we have seen, we actually see the effects, influences of these myths around native English speakers everywhere, right? Including employment, teachers' professional identity development. 1 month course, somebody becomes a teacher. 4 years education, I become a teacher. Then most of the students again go for the native speaker, right? Because of perceived advantages, learner attitudes. So the effects are extensive and visible. Even if we don't maybe question them, these are extensive and visible. Now we're getting more and more aware, even in material selection, language assessment, as I just showed you in reference to TOEFL, and language teaching methods. Now we are in a post-method era, right? Okay, you might still benefit from certain principles of previous teaching methods and approaches, but at least setting native speaker competence in most cases is no longer a relevant and realistic objective. And now we have these academic movements and new paradigms that criticize, that challenge these myths about native speakers and their influence in language teaching. So, thank you so much for your patience, kindly listening to me. So, if there are any questions, I would be more than welcome to receive your questions.
Okay. Yeah, this is wonderful talk. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So Professor Dr. Ali Karakaş. Actually, after the talk, we should open the poll, you know, for, you know, taking side, pro or, you know, native or non-native. So there are several issues raised in the, you know, even in the chat box. So now it's time for Q&A section, comments, sharing. Okay, please feel free to write down your questions in the chat box of the Zoom and I will read for you, or you can switch on your microphone and ask live. Everyone's welcome, please. Yeah,
I'm just checking the chat box. There are useful entries actually from Cheryl, from Dr. Yusuf as well. I told you I felt a little hesitant because he's the expert on this construction of nativeness, non-nativeness. He has written a thesis.
Actually, one thing that I'm strongly agree with you is that just because if a person, you know, was born in one particular country and speak, you know, that particular language, I mean, since they were, you know, children, it doesn't mean that, I mean, we are not able to use this as the indicator, you know, if he or she is a good or bad English teacher, actually. Yeah. So, and what I mean, from my experience is that I mean, in practice, I mean, in reality, in Thailand, for example, I mean, I'm quite agree that some educational institutions, they still somehow favor more native when comparing to non-natives. Sometimes because of maybe of marketing strategy in order to attract more, you know, customers or learners in that case. And of course, when you discuss about the discrimination, one thing that I found from my own experience is that the discrimination in English language teaching, when we talk about native or non-native, it's not only happen to native one actually. It's not only happen to non-native one actually, but also native speaker as well. Especially if your external appearance doesn't match with the perception or belief of the learners or parents. For example, one of the case of my friends, he applied as an English teacher. I mean, at one particular university in Thailand. I mean, he passed the paper examination and teaching demonstration, and he has been waiting for about a few days before he got the result. And one day, I mean, in the early morning, he got a phone call from the university and mentioned that he didn't pass the didn't pass the exam because of his external appearance doesn't fit to the perception and beliefs, you know, of the learners and teachers and learner and the parent, because of he has a dark skin actually. But what those committees prefer actually, you have not just only you are not just only the American nationality or British nationality is not enough. You also have to provide some kinds of white skin, blue eyes, and brown hair. So in that case, yeah, that's happened in my society in Thailand. And I think it's not just only happened in Thailand actually. I believe that there are some other countries. I mean, this kind of discrimination, I mean, keep somehow, you know, exist in English language teaching communities. I mean, maybe I can start with the question. Then it seems like no one asking you a question. From your experience, Professor Ali, do you think is it possible, you know, to change, you know, people to change their belief or their perceptions, you know, towards how they perceive native or non-native speakers?
Actually, it was also part of my PhD thesis. I had these two sections, attitudes and ideologies. Attitudes are mostly individual and tend to change easily. But when it comes to ideologies, you know, this is something that we have maybe through these experiences. And since we rarely question, you know, whether they have this scientific, logical basis, they are very hard to change, right? Often we need to go through these first-hand experiences. Until the time, you know, I made students listen to these different native speakers. They believed in my listening classes, these speakers are the most intelligible, you know. Mm-hmm. So we should have these, you know, native speaker like accent so that we could be also understood intelligibly by everyone. But during the classes, after the listening sections, mm-hmm. they had trouble because their previous, you know, experiences, they didn't have that much actual listening at high school. But they just developed these stuff from their teachers, because whenever they made a mistake, their teachers corrected them, right? Mm-hmm. Whenever they just didn't maybe properly use the TH sound, the teacher criticized the student. This is not the way we produce the sound. Maybe the learner got such a kind of, let's say, a remark, a comment by the teacher. I'm going to give you a very actually interesting example. We have these Erasmus programs, bilateral agreements with European countries. After students stay in a different country, like a full, let's say, term, like 3 or 4 months, they, you know, change lots of the ideas actually about language, how language is spoken. For example, most of our students go to Poland and Portugal, and they see these differences, you know, how Polish people use English, how it's different from their expectations, because they expect that, you know, anybody around the world speak like the speakers they listen to in the audio files in their course books. But they just realize this real world English and school English are quite different. When they have this awareness, I guess they start slowly changing their ideologies as well. So I guess you have published several papers and you actually highlighted the importance of these awareness raising activities, right? Like foreigner student meet and talk sessions, send them, have some kind of direct experiences, right? And let them just see how people are using English, at a worldwide, but also the differences in their accents, in their usages, in their stress, in their toning, for example, due to the L1 backgrounds actually. Yes, ideologies might change, but it's going to take a long time, and it requires, from my perspective, first-hand experience. If we just keep saying, okay, this is the case, no. When people experience something, right, when they're involved in something, they learn better.
Yeah.
Tell me I forget, teach me I remember, involve me I'll learn.
Yeah.
Hello, Dr. Ali. I have a question. So yeah.
Okay.
Am I able to ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So actually, they are like many of my students listening here. So they are from the School of Education. So I really like the point that you said you mentioned. I remember that your student in your class, like they were struggling in to listen, you know, to different kind of the variety of accents. So my question is, as you I used to teach listening class before, so this is what I'm going to do with my student too, that I'm going to teach them, demonstrate them how to teach listening skills, you know. But based on my experience, like in the past when I was a student, none of the English teacher introduced the variety of accent. They just focus on like British accent, American accent. And so I think I became to know the word like world Englishes and totally agree with that. Like actually we have different kind of accent, you know, we just can't really focus on only British or American or even like Canadian, which like they speak English. So my question here is, what's the technique or the tactics that you use to kind of lead your student to expose to the variety and of the English accent? And what type of materials that you implement in your class? Thank you.
Yes, Professor.
But sometimes I guess I miss some parts of the, you know. Can you hear me clearly? Because I guess I'm having some kind of internet problem again.
It's
Dr.
clear
Yusuf,
now.
can you hear me? Dr. Torban, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, because I guess this is internet cuts. I couldn't hear the rest of the question, but as far as I understand, what kind of techniques or activities we might use, right? Again, to increase learners' awareness in listening classes. Is this a question?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, based on my understanding, you know, sometimes we have to use the research that we have under our
I think maybe he has a problem on internet connection, I guess.
Sorry, is my question ruin the internet signal?
No, it's not such that case actually.
I know.
Okay. Ajahn, any lectures? So any lectures can comment or, you know, give some suggestions based on the questions, you know.
Okay. So let me try to suggest the some activities then, because I'm teaching the global Englishes at the moment, and one of the main aims of the of the course is that to increase the awareness regarding the diversity of English nowadays. So, okay, I think Ali is. Okay, it's okay. He might come back later, I guess. Okay. So one of the activities that I did with my students is that I took them to outside. You know, to experience themselves with the foreigners at the travel attraction in Phuket, in Krabi, for example. So in that case, they will be experiencing themselves. You know, they have to prepare some kinds of interview questions, and then they have to practice the interview with me first. And after that, I will take them to the travel like a tourist destination. And then in that case, they have to interview, you know, many different tourists from different countries. So, and then when we come back, we are going to discuss and present together. So this particular activity is very, I mean, it's very challenging them actually, and it can increase their awareness regarding diversification of English a lot. They can see how people, you know, from different parts of the world use English differently, but still able to understand one another. And it's increased their intelligibility a lot. And actually, Ajahn Piang Picha, because we are in the same university at the moment, if I have run this, I'm planning to run this activity again. If the COVID-19 is getting better, I might invite you and your student to join as a part of the trip. And then in that case, we can try to go there together. Is that okay?
Yes, deal. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. And one more activity is that because our university, there are some international students, right? So I normally invite the international student from our university to be a part of the class, actually, to attend like an activity, to join activity in the class with my students. And I provide them some kinds of topics in the classroom. And then they have to discuss with my student and like a rotate, you know, and then the international student have to rotate to different groups. So in that case, my student will also, you know, observe themselves how international students use English differently from different countries. And another thing that you can do is that you also can try to find out some kinds of, you know, like a short clips or a short videos, you know, of the interlocutors between people from different countries. It can be like a Thai people communicate with Malaysian, Malaysia communicate with Chinese, or Chinese communicate with Indonesian.
Yes. Hello.
I guess this time we lost Dr. Yusuf. Previously, I got disconnected. I just noticed, you know, I was just giving the answer. All of a sudden, I just thought, okay, nobody is because I got disconnected. Talking to myself.
Okay, so you can continue. Yeah, you can give some suggestions.
Actually, I made similar comments. You know, here we have this international office. I contacted them and I got the list of our international students. And I sent them an email, you know, if they're available, we arrange a kind of a time for meeting. I brought them with our student teachers here in the English language teaching department. So we organized such kind of weekly meetings where we came together, we spent some time, you know, we just went to a cafe. And later on, I just actually transferred it into a kind of a project. I contacted the local schools here. I said, okay, for, you know, to motivate learners, at least to speak English, right? To increase their willingness, because here in Turkey, most students see English as a school subject like maths to pass with high grades. But language is quite different from a school subject. It's something living entity. So when these students, you know, we just pair students and they visit schools per week, once per week, 2 hours, you know, just for speaking classes. In the company of the school teacher, English language teacher, the learners became very motivated. Honestly, I also visited the schools with these international students. They use words, just simple words, to communicate with these speakers. You know, somebody different in color, like Nigerian students, Pakistani students, and they were trying to communicate by using hand gestures, simple English words. So that was quite motivating because they just noticed that the English is not like a geography class. When you have it, right? When you have it, it's like a tool, right? You can use to communicate with anyone, even in your own school context. Look, there were visitors who can't speak Turkish. Now you're making attempts. So they see why they should learn English, what kind of benefits they actually can derive from learning English. Otherwise, it was just a school subject with a Turkish English teacher. So they weren't that much interested and motivated. One of the activities that we use, as Dr. Yusuf said again, lots of video clips, but maybe for advanced levels, like at the university level, meta-linguistic discussion or courses on global Englishes, sociolinguistics, where you're going to discuss dialects, the importance of native speakers, and to what extent it is important, for example. This is something we don't do. We don't question, we don't discuss. We just accept. We just think it's correct. It applies to anyone. But when you have the discussion, believe me, lots of different ideas emerge.
Thank you. And may I ask one more question? Which is, I would want to know the opinion from Dr. Ali, Dr. Lee from Korea too, and yeah, Dr. Joseph there. Oh no, Yusuf. And so the point here is like you have been talking a lot about the kind of the accents that actually like English as a lingua franca, right? And sometimes of the broken English in the real world reality they're using, you know, even the native English speaker, they use broken. This is a bit like paradox. I think it's a bit conflict to the when we have to the taste. You can't deny it because we need like kind of high proficiency and also the intelligibility, you know, in English. Like for example, if you have to take the test like the IELTS, I think you had that experience, the TOEFL, and this still needs like I say it English. It's a bit like conflict here. So what do you think about it? Why are we just, to me, I think I'm trying to convince my students who will be the teachers in the future that don't care about the accent, don't care about like how we speak like broken English sometimes, just export to the language as much as you can. But once when they have to kind of face the taste, you know, even like here we I think in the European like framework, right? If you heard about A1 B1, you know, that's really kind of conflict. So what do you think about that, and how do you motivate the student listening now? Like, you know, what's the difference like spoken English, broken English, and standard English? Yeah.
Thank you so much. This is a very interesting question, and this is the concern of most students, because as I already told you, if I expose learners to the varieties of different languages, I should be also tolerant of the differences, right? In the speaking, in the examination, but the standard tests don't have this tolerance. Let me give you an example. While assessing, right, the listening section, they often actually hire native English speakers. For example, if the native speaker, especially for TOEFL IBT, you know, they record your, let's say, talk or answers, then they listen afterwards and they mark you. What if the assessor have no familiarity with different accents? I'm Turkish, so maybe what I might be intelligible to that assessor, but if the assessor is a bilingual, multilingual speaker who has familiarity, I might get higher scores. You see, depending on the assessor's bilingual background or the language background, I might be scored differently. So I guess that students are right in terms of having such concerns, because they might actually feel that their difference in their accents, in the use of language, the way they sound, intonation, pitch, or melody of the language might be a kind of a drawback, right? Because your accent gives away your already identity, right? The non-native identity. And what if it might be prejudiced by some assessors? But for our own classrooms, if we just expose learners to the varieties, we should also be tolerant of these differences in language, right? Here in our department, I have some colleagues who are very resistant against these kind of notions. And even some claim that we, like global English researchers, ELF researchers, are destroying and killing the language. This is what my colleague actually claims. You know why? Because my colleague is an expert in assessment and measurement. So what is standard is easily measurable. Now you're making their job is actually complicated. Why? You just easily assess grammar. How can you assess communicative competence, right? You have to develop rubrics, descriptors. It's not so simple. Communicative efficiency, getting across the message, right? Using communicative strategies. Long pauses, for example, are seen as a kind of a deficient, right? When somebody make a long pause, but it's a strategy. I just think about what I'm going to formulate. Maybe I'm buying some time, right, to make a proper statement, but they immediately label this, oh, you make a long pause, you just keep saying, or using conversation, fillers, get fillers, yeah, but these are all actually part of how we use our mother tongues. But if you just focus on whether someone sounds like native speaker in the rubric out of 5, 4, this is actually unjust, unfair. And your students are right, because such tests are discriminatory. But we embrace a kind of a tolerant approach in my classes, and I also reflect this tolerance in my assessment. I never mark learners down because of their grammatical mistakes in the written examinations, in the oral examinations either. Because if I just emphasize the importance of stuff, I act differently when it comes to marking, it's a kind of a self-contradiction, right? What I say does not match up to what I do in the classroom. But this doesn't mean that I will just promote non-standard use of English. No, this is already how they use the language. They know the rules in principle. All my students, right? They know the grammatical rules, but passive knowledge and productive knowledge is quite different. I might also know the rules about English, but believe me, after the recording, listen to me. How many grammatical mistakes or mistakes about pronunciation or deviations from standard English you would notice and count? But I guess so far we didn't have any communication breakdown. I guess the messages were, sent across clearly. And even if there's a problem, we can clarify, right? This is also a strategy. We do not always have smooth conversations. Sometimes we misunderstand. Sometimes we don't understand at all, right? So we have these clarification questions. Could you please repeat that? What do you mean by this? Excuse me if I get it wrong, but is this what you meant, right? We use this a lot in our mother tongue conversation, in L1 conversation. So why not in English communication? It is not a deficiency. It is what we do for effective, right? Smooth flow, for flowing communication, actually.
Okay.
But our, influence might be limited with what we can access, right? Because we have no control over these international tests. But I have control over my tests, my teaching.
Okay. Okay. So the time is it's running late. Okay.
Kalau kita main tugas screen kok mau tak bantu
Okay, so I do believe that. Okay, so you might have other questions, many questions to come. Ask. Ajahn Yusuf, you mute someone speaking. I cannot. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So yeah, actually there are many questions that you want to ask, but the time is up already. So as we promised that we're gonna have like just only 2 hours, 1 to 3. Okay, so we have learned a lot from the 6 minutes of there are controversial issues between native English speakers and non-native ones. So which one teach better in English class? So which one should we call standard English users that we have learned from the content, and also the norms, the requirements, okay, raised to judge, okay, whether it's standardized and non-standardized one. And we've come across intelligibility, okay, being focused, and the matter of cultures brought between NES and non-native English speakers, and world Englishes, okay, ELF, okay, English as a lingua franca, and global Englishes emerge. This is the one that many issues, important issues or hot issues that we might raise pop up in our mind. So anyway, thank you very much for your cooperation and interaction. Deep and insightful knowledge that we got from the speaker. So I'm strongly confident that we have learned a lot from the session regarding the topic of the myth of nativeness of English language teaching. Ladies and gentlemen, as I already mentioned earlier, that there's a link that I had that you have to complete before the end of our section. I already sent in the chat box. So it consists of 2 forms, okay, the evaluation form and the certificate one. So please completed, and you can pick up the certificate later from the links afterwards. Okay. So during the time that you fill in the form, so let me announce. I would like to introduce you to the next event. Please join us for next event. Okay, very interesting. The topic is, yeah, let me share. So can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, okay.
And I just shared the link for the certificate and the link for the evaluation forms.
Yeah, okay. This is the speaker, okay, Professor Dr.
Willie.
Yeah, Willie. Yeah, Willie Renan, yeah, okay, from Nanyang Technological University from Singapore. Okay, under the topic Pathways to Advanced Second Language Competence. At the time 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Okay, on 15 December 2021. Okay, with the moderator, Assistant Professor Dr. Suraya Sulaiman. Okay. Yeah, so you done with the link filling completion?
Yeah, everyone, please complete the evaluation form. And at the end of the form, you will be able to see the link in order to collect your certificate. So this means you have two links to be completed. So the first link is the evaluation form. And at the end of the evaluation form, you will get another link for the e-certificate. So everyone, please complete the form. Yes. So for today's sessions, then thank you very much, everyone, for your actively participations. And thank you, as a Professor Dr. Ali, my colleagues, my friends, my brother, and hope we can meet up again. So for today, we might need to say goodbye now. And I guess Ajahn Ali may have something else to do. So everyone, please take care of yourself during this pandemic. And hope to see you again very soon, which means next Wednesday, right? Next Wednesday. Hope to see you. Hope to see you all again, Professor Dr. Shirley from Korea and Ajahn Piang Picha. So everyone, today please have a nice day and please stay safe during this pandemic. Thank you very much for today and see you later. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yusuf. Enjoy the rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ali.
Thank you very much.
So nice to see you again. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye. Okay, if you are done, completing the forms, okay, so you can leave.
Yes. I still here because I'm waiting for the form to be completed. So thank you again, Ajahn Nungroj Chavan, for your kindness of to be a part of the session today. I'm very pleased with your performance today. You have done very excellent job today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for kind. Okay, so yeah, so most welcome. I'm waiting for the
good job. Thank you, Ajahn Yusuf.
Thank you, Ajahn Vimrat. Great to see you here.
Okay, I'm going to write the report now.
Okay.
Goodbye. Yeah. Assalamualaikum.
Salam. So I'm going to be here for another 5 minutes before we closing the session. Okay. Oh, it's still live on YouTube actually.
What about recording, Ajahn?
Done. Recording is okay. Actually, I got some kinds of internet connection as well, but it's okay. It's converting now. Hello,ครับ. I think it's converting. I don't know what it's converting now. It should be okay. Alhamdulillah for today's session.